So I'm back with part 2 of my Bleach Thousand Year Blood War poem breakdowns. Part 1 covered the first 6 episodes of Thousand Year Blood War, and this video is going to be going over the rest of Season 1. For those unaware, the poems that are recited after the credits of each episode of the anime are inspired from the poems that Kubo included at the beginning of each manga volume, almost always recited by the character shown on the cover of said volume. Some of the poems in the anime are from the manga, while others are new ones written for the anime exclusively, and I'm going to be going into how I think they relate to or flesh out their respective characters. I'm not fluent in Japanese or poetry, so I'm not going to be going over how accurate the poem translations are, outside of certain cases here or there, or if the poems are arranged in a proper format. So if you are fluent in Japanese or poetry, feel free to comment your thoughts down below, I'd love to read them. I'm just going to be expressing my interpretations of the poems as they relate to the characters in question, so let's pick up where we left off. Episode 7 stars Kukaku and is another anime original.
I looked to the heavens and chased that star. Burned into my eyes the afterglow of its smoke.
Trying to gain insight on a character like Kukaku is tough because we know so little about her. Like, the poem is seemingly just about her watching people get launched in her cannon, with the star she mentions probably just being Ichigo, but I'm stumped on the second line. Maybe it's not even something important beyond just extra flavor text to how she can view the smoke of the cannon even after it's long gone, but it's written in a sort of wistful way. Like she wishes that she too could be one of the stars launched across the sky. Melancholy does seem to underscore her character across all of her appearances to a degree, from the death of her brother and onwards, though it's never really a part of her character that's brought to the forefront and focused on thanks to her more brusque and decisive personality. But I can only interpret this poem as her being sad or forlorn. It honestly ties back to her original poem from Volume 9, which also has a sort of uncharacteristic sentimentality to it. Looking at both poems back to back, I suppose one reading would be that she doesn't like just being the canon lady and that she'd like to go on adventures as well. The Shiba clan has had its status revoked, so she's more or less sort of banished to her position, but according to Yoruichi, it's not as if Kukaku really cares about that or wishes for her clan to be reinstated, so I'm not entirely sure how accurate this reading is. Honestly, the more interesting part of her original poem to me is the "with our eyes open" part. I'm unsure if it's supposed to be read as all of us are dreaming with our eyes open, as in daydreaming or fantasizing, or flying the skies with our eyes open, taking in the sights. But I'm leaning more towards the latter because the alternative to flying with their eyes open is interesting to me because that would be flying with their eyes closed. Flying is often used as a metaphor for freedom, so flying with your eyes closed brings to mind to me the idea of a false freedom, blissful ignorance. You think you're free to fly wheresoever you choose, but you can't actually see what the world truly is like. So her poem claiming that we all wish to fly with our eyes open can be read as her claiming that we all wish to truly be free. Why she would think that, as if she's knowingly skeptical of freedom or of the world at large, leads me into more fanficky territory. A popular theory surrounding Kukaku is that she used to be a member of Squad Zero, or at least had closer ties to them than a regular noble, especially since it's her canon that seemingly exclusively grants entry to the Ryokyu. Her missing an arm is used as evidence to further support this, as it's the same right arm that Ichibei indicates towards when he explains how Squad Zero members have bones made of oaken. Of course, them having oaken in their bones extends to their entire skeleton, not just their right arm, but you can understand the visual connection here. If this was something that Kubo was trying to subtly hint at, I'd imagine this would be the way he'd go about it. So her missing that arm would be an indicator of her lost status. Anyway, all this is to say, regardless of if she was or was not a member of Squad Zero, but especially more so if she was, she would still be aware of how shady Squad Zero is, and how they're basically the arbiters of history, dictating exactly how in the dark the regular citizens of the Soul Society are in myriad matters. In other words, everyone is basically as free as Squad Zero allows them to be. A sinister interpretation of how Squad Zero only promotes people who make make great contributions to the Soul Society is only so that they're more easily under their thumb, so that they don't use their technology or ideas against the status quo. So Kukaku's poem can potentially be read with all that in mind as her wishing that actual freedom existed, not under the rule of anyone higher up, to actually soar through the sky and see the world for what it truly is, because as it stands now, most of the Soul Society's inhabitants are flying with their eyes closed, unaware of the greater scope of the plot, and Kukaku understands the frustration that comes from being left in the dark, especially after all that went down regarding Kaien. I think her poems talking about the sky so much, beyond just being an obvious subject to use considering her whole deal with the cannons, would be a missed opportunity if they didn't tie into Squad Zero in some way, since they and the Ryokyu as a whole also involve imagery regarding the sky and the heavens. In any event, Kukaku needs more screen time and a backstory, cause I'm tired of only having headcanons for her. Episode 8 showcases Kenpachi.
Neither form nor soul will escape my blade. Nothing except you.
The English version is almost needlessly flowery, since the Japanese version just has him say what he says to Grammy later on. There's nothing that I can't cut. Except without the pronoun, leaving it more as, there's nothing that can't be cut. The except you is most likely referring to Unohana, obviously, but beyond that, there's not much else to say about this one. The anime original poems tend to be sort of bland, I guess, for lack of a better word. Not much extra insight into the characters like a normal poem, though I guess Kubo had to come up with these in a more constricted time frame than normal, so that might explain things. Episode 9 adapts the poem from Volume 59, which showcases Unohana.
Battle is everything.
Conversely, we get actual volume-based poems like this one that are also pretty bare-boned, just like the anime original ones. Battle is everything, as she's the first Kenpachi, so obvious connection there. I guess an alternative reading is like everything is a battle, like every facet of life is a battle of some sort in some way, but I don't know if that's just me trying to make more out of this poem than is really there. Unohana is sort of a one-note character, whether you're talking about Retsu or Yachiru, so I guess it makes sense her poem is this brief. Would have liked to get a bit more out of her during her last hurrah, since we never got to actually know much about her in the first place. Like what her Shikai really did, or what her Bankai did, nothing. But whatever. Episodes 10 and 11 are both adapted from the Volume 60 poem, which is about Masaki.
You without sin are like the sun.
Even with your sins, you are like the sun.
First thing to address is what I just said. These poems are split between Masaki and Isshin in the anime, but in the manga it's solely Masaki's. It is kind of romantic how the anime did things though. As for what it means, I can only imagine it's in reference to Ichigo, their son. Isshin does attribute the sun to Masaki multiple times in the actual story, stating their family orbits around her, but it wouldn't make any sense for Masaki as the narrator to be referring to herself like that. Of course, I guess it could have always been the case that Isshin was narrating the poem in the manga in reference to Masaki, how even with her sins, her hollow factor, he still views her as perfect. And a fire-type fighter like Isshin using the sun in his poetry would make sense. But beyond Masaki, Ichigo also is attributed with sun imagery from time to time. Though Kubo is sort of inconsistent with it, Ichigo is often symbolized by a moon, from the name of his Zanpakuto, Zangetsu, to certain chapter titles that have the word moon in it. But other times, he's referenced to as a black sun, to balance Rukia's white moon. Ichigo and Rukia both honestly have attacks that are named after the moon, and I'm not sure what Kubo's intention there was beyond just drawing more parallels between them as the two lead characters. In any event, Ichigo being referred to as a sun isn't completely out of nowhere, to say nothing of being the eponymous headless star, sun being a kind of star, in the Thousand Year Blood War chapters of the same name, pointing out that he is a star with no head, a Sternritter without a boss. because he's a Quincy who does not serve Yhwach. And I'm also just now learning that a black sun is actually Nazi imagery, which I'm sure that doesn't mean anything. So the poem being Ichigo's parents talking about him is kinda cute and could honestly be a valid reading, or it could be Isshin and Masaki speaking about each other, or just Isshin talking about Masaki, or maybe even Masaki talking about Isshin. I think it's just the Kurosaki poem at this point, and we can just leave it at that. And the last poem of the first season, from episode 12, adapts the poem from volume 61, which showcases Black Zangetsu, the Yhwach Quincy Zangetsu.
I believe the world is full of danger. I want to protect you from it. Only because inside me is the same impulse as that danger.
So the idea here is clearly just that him and Yhwach share an origin. Within Zangetsu is the essence of Yhwach, and Zangetsu wishes to protect Ichigo from him. Naturally, the kanji used for protect is the same kanji from Ichigo's own name. Not really much else I can think of to say on this one, since it's also pretty straightforward. I do hope that the anime does go a bit more into the idea that Ichigo has a piece of Yhwach inside of him. I expected something to come from that in the manga, but things were so rushed towards the end, maybe Kubo did have some plans that never came to fruition. In any event, yeah, Zangetsu viewing the world cautiously as a place rife with danger lends itself pretty well to how Yhwach views the world as a place filled with death and fear, so there is an interesting overlap there. The poem does remind me of how Zangetsu earlier in the series swore to help Ichigo to prevent it from ever raining in his inner world again. Now, what's interesting with this is that while the rain does act as a visual cue for Ichigo's own emotional turmoil and sadness, the origin of why rain specifically holds meaning to Ichigo stems from how it was raining when his mom died. That event acting as the impetus for Ichigo's entire hero complex and self-guilt he has to work through. Now we know that Yhwach was the cause of Masaki's death, as he stripped from her powers when she was engaged in combat with Grand Fisher, robbing her of what would have been an otherwise very easy victory for her. And it was via Auswählen that Yhwach did this, which the anime portrays as rain. With that in mind, the idea of Zangetsu being terrified of the rain in Ichigo's inner world holds extra significance, as he's forced to live in a world where Ichigo's sadness takes the form of his own ability to take life, the Auswählen, a rain that would resemble to him a portent of death. Yhwach fears death, so it makes sense to me that Zangetsu would likewise fear what reminds him of his own death-bringing ability, and why he would dedicate himself to protecting Ichigo to keep it from raining again. You know, aside from the fact that Zangetsu's a part of Ichigo and wants to protect him just because of that, but, you know, sometimes two things can be true at the same time. Anyway, those were all the poems from the first season of Thousand Year Blood War. I'll be back at some point with the next batch from Season 2. If you have any thoughts of your own about how you are interpreting these poems, leave them in the comments. If you have any comments on my interpretations, comment those as well. And if you are someone that is actually fluent in Japanese and have noticed that I've made a mistake here or there, please correct me as well. Like and subscribe for more Bleach content. I make them whenever. There's no real consistency. Check out my other videos. We did an entire fan dub of Can't Fear Your Own World. Check that out. If you're into other things like Kingdom Hearts or Final Fantasy, we also have videos about that. Thanks for watching.